Cybersecurity has never been a higher priority for IT leaders. With high-profile data breaches in the news every day, new ransomware attacks appearing with alarming frequency, and the ever-present skills shortage, cyber is arguably the key issue on IT leaders' minds. All organizations should have a response plan in place for when security issues inevitably arise. That's a reactive strategy. But it's also crucial to have a proactive security strategy, and that's the topic of today's webinar. Joining me today to discuss the issue is Donnie MacColl, Director of EMEA Technical Services at HelpSystems, and I'm Stuart Sumner, Editorial Director of Computing. Now, before we kick off, just a few quick points of housekeeping. First of all, hopefully you should see us on your screens today. I'll be opening up a couple of interactive polls. They'll happen on your screens as if by magic. Donnie will be presenting a few slides they will appear on your screen as well. I'd like to direct your attention to the Ask a Question button you should see towards the bottom of your screen. Those questions will come through to me here, and obviously I'll put them to Donnie. So please do get your questions in. We've already had a question actually today, which is wonderful, which I'll be putting to Donnie very shortly. But please do keep them coming during the course of the webinar. Now, what does sometimes happen is when I announce there's 5 minutes to go, suddenly everyone asks that burning question they've been thinking of the whole way through. And of course, there's no time for me to ask it. So please do get your questions in early. We love hearing from you. Okay, I think that's about enough of the housekeeping. So I mentioned the polls already. Let's open the first one now. So it's multiple choice. You'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to answer it, and we'll have a look. We'll come back to it then. So please do get answering. And in this first poll, we're asking you, what common security risks or entry points are you most concerned about? And hopefully it's on your screen now, and you should be able to see multiple choice. The options are phishing, ransomware, misconfigurations, poor passwords, lack of patching, orphaned accounts, lost or stolen devices, and other. As I say, about 10 to 15 minutes or so to answer that one, and then we'll come back and take a look at the results. Okay, so I think that's about enough from me. Donnie, we're talking today about a proactive cybersecurity strategy. Probably the best point to start is to actually define what it is, what we mean when we say that. So what is a proactive cybersecurity strategy?
Well, thanks, Stuart. I think everybody understands what a reactive approach is to security. Security being quite a broad brush term, obviously. And people tend to think if something happens, I'll react to it. We've got something in place to try and put it right, whether that's people doing something or processes or technology, preferably a combination. Taking a proactive approach really puts you a step ahead and lets you try and predict and dynamically change the attacks as they may be coming in. So people think, well, I've got a virus checker. Fantastic. I've got a virus checker and be very proactive. You are being proactive, then I wouldn't know anybody that wouldn't have a virus checker. I think the whole idea of a proactive security strategy is to make it so difficult or just not as easy at breaking in somewhere else, if you like, that you put people off or put attackers off. So even if you have a basic security strategy, if somebody tries to breach your network or a device or an application and they find it a bit hard, then you might go elsewhere. Funnily enough, you'll find, and I'll try not to do this too much, Stuart, I tend to go off that tangent. Many years ago, I bought a house. And you'll find that most of my analogies are houses and cars because they're simple and I know about houses and cars. And when I moved in, I had the option, didn't have much money, had the option of buying a dining room table or a burglar alarm. And a friend of mine, the policeman, said, put the burglar alarm in. He said, in fact, if you can't afford it, just put in a dummy box. I thought it was a bit pointless, isn't it? He said, no, absolutely not. He said, because if somebody comes along the street and wants to break into your house and they see an alarm box, they're going to avoid that. And that made me think it is security. It's the equivalent of a virus checker. So I think it really is making it difficult for people to break in, try and put them off to go somewhere else is the most basic approach, let's say, and be ready to dynamically change as threat actors change the way that they would try and get into your environment. So that's why I say proactive, way better than reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, don't be the low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals. Be the harder, higher-hanging fruit. Yeah. Let's go to an audience question. As I mentioned in my introduction, we've had one already, which is fantastic. It's a good one as well. So what are the best practices you can adopt to build a proactive security strategy? So I guess a way to paraphrase that would be, how would you begin? Where would you kick off to try and build your proactive security strategy?
That is, in fact, what I'm going to do, Stuart, if you don't mind, I'm just going to share my screen. So really, really good question, and really good that somebody's thinking, well, we need to do something. Where are we going to start? What we find as we talk to literally thousands of customers and prospects each year is that everybody wants to do something, but they don't know where to start. And as I always say, start with something. So start with knowing what you've got, know where your data is, know what applications you're using, know what system you're using, hardware systems, know all your endpoints, really mapping out what you've got. And then you can prioritize what it is they want to protect first, whether it's the most valuable asset or the easiest area to actually put in a security strategy. So I think the whole point is know what you've got before you start trying to protect it. You might spend a lot of time and a lot of money protecting something that isn't actually that vulnerable, or even if somebody did manage to breach it, could cause absolutely minimal damage. So that would be my point. Start with knowing what you've got, and then you can talk to people like us or peers and just say, where would you start? And I think that's the best thing. Just talk to people that have already done it.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And it's interesting that idea of knowing what you've got isn't as trivial as it sounds. A lot of companies are quite bad at that, and understanding what the estate is, where it is, and what it comprises is definitely a body of work in itself. Excuse me. So I think this next question, we've touched on it a little bit already, but I think it's worth emphasizing. Why is it important? We've talked about not being the low-hanging fruit, but why is it important to have a proactive cybersecurity strategy in place?
So proactive and dynamically changing. I think that's the challenge is if you have reactive, then you're reacting, obviously reacting things as they happen. If you have proactive, then you're just trying to anticipate what the next threat may be. Now we talk about having a vulnerability scanner, which we'll talk about in a moment as we go along. So that's a really good place to start. Talk about having a vulnerability scanner, have a look at all the potential vulnerabilities that are out there, but they're already published. Once you know there's a vulnerability out there, then you're effectively reacting to it. So it's great to proactively look for trends. And that's what I always say to any person or any company looking at security strategy. It's great to react to something, but if you can look at a trend, then you might be able to predict what may happen in the future or where people might try and breach into your environment. So it's reactive is, like I say, typically static. And you've got a process or you've got a tool in place, and if A happens, then you're going to do something. It's looking for A and B happening and pulling everything together in a bit of a mesh network, if you like. So it's not anything you can ever be comfortable that you're secure. I was actually asked that question myself. We're a security company, and I was actually asked a question by a prospect. They said, well, are you secure? So are we secure as a company? We'd like to think so. We're very lucky that we have, look at the maturity level we'll talk about, we've got maturity level 5, as we should do as a cybersecurity company. Are we secure? And we can't be, because we don't know what's coming next. And that's very much trying to predict what's coming next, looking at all the information available to us, using tools, using people, using processes, see what's coming in, all the potential threats that are coming in, put them all together, and then trying to predict where the next potential breach will be. That's what I can guarantee you. There will be a next potential breach today. It's just, people are always trying to gain data to do something with it, which isn't always something you want them to be doing with it.
No, absolutely, and certainly as on computing, we're writing about security breaches constantly. It's it's almost a gift to security journalism or IT journalism. There's always something to write about. There's always attacks happening. Obviously, it's a very negative thing for the industry, but it is absolutely constant. So there's lots of different elements to a proactive cybersecurity strategy, and we've talked about a lot of them already. But could we talk about what are the most common components there?
Yeah. So typically what we say to people is to have a security strategy means you need to know where to start. So you need to know what you've got, you need to know where to start. A good start is to actually run a vulnerability scanner. Now, a vulnerability scanner is going to look for known vulnerabilities. That's the important bit. So known vulnerabilities. You can go out, you can get emails coming in, you can go and check the website for the known vulnerabilities. The great thing about known vulnerabilities are they're published, so you know where to start. The bad things about known vulnerabilities are people who are trying to do something against you know where the known vulnerabilities are, they know the weaknesses, and then they get on to trying to attack them. So I'd also start the vulnerability assessment. Typically a software tool that's going to look at what you want to target. So you may want to target an application, you may want to target your endpoints, you may want to target user profiles and IDs and passwords. So there's various areas, but really looking for vulnerabilities is a great place to start. People quite often say, well, should we do a pen test first? No, because if you do a pen test, it's going to be a bit too easy if you haven't identified what your most common vulnerabilities are and then try to sort of close them down before you start doing that. So vulnerability scanner is always great to give you a good idea of where your potential weaknesses are. Then you can prioritize them. We'll come on to that in a moment. It's also good to then start looking at application security. And these are really basic. This is your the applications that you use, are they actually secure? Quite often find one of the most common weaknesses with applications are they come with authority lists and an application user. Perhaps you can use an API to get into an application to do something and it has credentials to get and use it. That typically never changes or is published. So application security. Then we'd look at something like penetration testing, and then eventually get right up to the red teaming and the adversary simulation at the other end, which you'll see when I move the slide along will be level 5. So as I say, most common really, start with the vulnerability scanner and take it from there. Prioritize the vulnerabilities that you want to approach. Don't try and do all of them because you'll just end up chasing your tail day after day after day and never moving on to the next level of maturity.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you. Now, when we look at any kind of IT project, not just security, you have to have executive buy-in. You have to have that buy-in from the top. And a lot of projects fail when they don't have that push from the executive level. So how do you get buy-in from leadership to build a proactive security program like the one you're describing?
Well, whilst I think that securing everything inside your company has become more difficult and will only get more difficult, I actually think achieving executive buy-in, which has always been high in the list for the last 5, 6, 7 years of challenges that people have, I think it's actually got easier. I think now that the exec team are much more aware that companies are open to being breached. I think they've seen some of the, on the news, on the global news, some of the companies that have had a breach and have either closed down or just damaged their reputation so much that people lose trust in them, which is very, very difficult to get back. So, but I also think it's extremely important that for any cybersecurity strategy that it is from the exec team, so it becomes part of the company culture. But as I say, I think dollars are being put aside each year. Is it enough? It's never going to be enough, but you have to balance up running a business. I think that the fact that there is a potential threat that directors of a company could actually end up going to jail, I think that's made people actually think, I'll take it a bit more seriously from now on. So I think that's, yeah, I think the executive are much more aware. I think the fact that companies, and typically it's larger companies, which is a shame because they're typically because they know they're probably much more of a threat because there's much more to gain from breaching them, but they perhaps have the dollars available to do it. But like I say, I think there is a real definition, a segmentation of security at the board level that knows they have to do something and they have to continuously do it. It's not a one-off. It's not a, we'll spend some dollars this year and that'll be it. We can't be complacent. We know that the threats are always out there. And let's say that's what's good about the internet, good with companies like yourself. Companies now they can't hide away from it and say, I didn't know.
Yeah, certainly, and that's something I've seen change over the last decade. We've obviously been covering security stories the entire time, and certainly seen that trend evolving, where exec teams seem to be more aware of security issues and aware that it's something that needs proper funding, and it's actually central to the business, and it's an existential threat to the business if it's not funded and organised properly. Another issue is that we hear a lot about from CISOs and their teams that there's so many vulnerabilities and threats that are evolving all the time, new ones appearing all the time. It was really hard to prioritize, to manage the overall risk, but also prioritize between, where do we need to focus our investment? Obviously, there's always a limited budget. Where does it need to go to be most effective? So, how do organizations cope with that need to manage risk and prioritize?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And what I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll just refer to this this slide I've got up at the moment, looking at different maturity levels. So really, what you're referring to there, Stuart, is really level 1. Level 0 is where people are really doing nothing. They might have a virus checker. They're kind of putting on manual patches as and when they find out about them. So no real strategy. Level 1 is where, so that's level 0 is non-existent. Level 1 is where people are thinking, actually, we do need to do something. This is where the vulnerability scanners come into it. And the great thing about the vulnerability scanners, they're easy to come by. They're good. You can run them. The downside is it's going to give you so much information that you're going to be potentially totally overloaded with hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerabilities, and you might panic. You might think, well, I didn't realize we were so open or so exposed or so vulnerable. It's quite a powerful word, vulnerable. You know, it can be quite panicking, quite scary. So I think having a vulnerability scan gives you an awful lot of information, perhaps too much information. Looking at level 0, you're also doing essential patching, so keeping ahead of that. You've got some basic processes in place to say, if we think a breach occurs, then send an email to the security team, which might be one person who already got another role to do. I think what is really good is, like I say, get the vulnerability scanner. You're going to get overloaded information. Pick and choose the one that you deal with. And that's where you can actually, the good tools will score them. So it'll give you a higher score to say, actually, this is something you really should be looking at. What I would say is a lot of companies get stuck at level 1, because what they end up doing is thinking, right, we've got a great plan, putting a security strategy. We've moved away from non-existent. We're going to be very proactive. We've got a vulnerability scan. We're just going to have to cure and solve and stop all these vulnerabilities, all these weaknesses. That's not the case. It's more about vulnerability management. It's all about prioritizing the potential threat, blocking those vulnerabilities, and you're never, ever going to be able to stop all the vulnerabilities that will be reported. It's just not possible. You'll end up doing nothing else. And that is the challenge. Some companies get stuck just trying to close every potential vulnerability before they can move on to the next step, which is level 2, the assessment and compliance. So use an automated tool and just get a tool that will actually score the vulnerabilities for you.
Yep, perfect. Thanks for that. That makes good sense. So another question I had is around regulatory compliance. So there's obviously lots of heavily regulated industries around financial services being the main one that comes to mind. So what's the role there? Is there regulation that indicates they have to have a proactive cybersecurity strategy in place?
Yeah, I mean, sounds like perfect. That really, there we're talking about level 2, Stuart. So that's a very timely question. Thank you for that. It's if you take something like PCI DSS, you take the credit card industry, you take, say for the European market, it's not global, but predominantly for the European market, GDPR. There are 2 regulations that have done really an extremely good job of making companies aware you have to comply with the regulation and saying what it is that you need to do. Now, the downside I find with regulatory compliance, and I'm going to pick on PCI DSS and GDPR, is that companies think if they comply with the regulation, then that's it. They think they've done a really good job and they've met the security standard they need to do for that company. I think the thing to remember is they're a baseline. The whole point with being compliant to something like PCI DSS or with the GDPR, they're just a baseline. They're almost a starting point. Now, they're a really good starting point. They're way more than just scanning and patching, and they're quite specific. If you take something like the GDPR, it's very specific. Say, this is what you have to do. These are the processes you have to have in place, but it doesn't specify what solutions you have to use, with the exception of encrypting data. That's the only specific the GDPR will say, you've got to make sure the data is secure, and if you don't, we're going to hit you with a big stick, but make sure your data is secure, encrypt it, is one of the main areas that we can do. If it comes to something like PCI DSS, it's been around a lot longer. I think it's 2006 or something like that. When PCI DSS first came out, there's 142 different areas that you had to address. Now, I was just looking at PCI DSS 4 that came out at the end of March 2022. And I was actually, I was impressed with what the regulatory compliance says should be doing. I was not so impressed with the fact that the recommendations, and you've really got another 2 or 3 years to implement some of them. So I think my whole long-winded way, as always, of saying regulatory compliance is key. PCI DSS does say you have to do areas like vulnerability scanning, for example, insist that you have to do that. But then what you do with those vulnerabilities, it's not very specific on, and it gives you too much leeway in my mind. So that said, regulatory compliance, great, good starting point. It's a small part of your actual entire security strategy. So please don't think once you've complied to regulation that you're bulletproof. There's a lot more to do, and there always will be.
Yeah, it's not just about box ticking.
No.
Now, we're going to come to the results of the first poll just in a moment. Before we do, though, another audience questions come in. This time, someone's asked, please tell us about your favourite vulnerability scanner. We mentioned vulnerability scanners quite a bit. Do you have a favourite or anything you'd especially recommend?
Yes. HelpSystems.
It's an open goal, that question from the audience, wasn't
it? yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, with vulnerability scanners, there's loads out there. I'm obviously going to say the company that I work for, but what I would say is the reason that I generally say to look at the HelpSystems solution, the reason I'm saying HelpSystems is we have a number of known solutions. People know them by other names, and want to refer to them as HelpSystems. We have HelpSystems security strategy, HelpSystems security suites. The reason I say to look at HelpSystems is something that we're really working towards. Our strategy as a company is to consolidate your entire security strategy. So yeah, vulnerability scan is great. If you want phishing simulation, great. If you want data leakage or data loss prevention, great. I think, and you'll see Gartner talking about this now, is actually trying to consolidate the number of security solutions that you have and minimize the number of vendors that you work with, something that they're really looking towards. And that's something we're looking towards as well. So if you've got a vulnerability scanner that doesn't just say, here's all the vulnerabilities, would you like to do something with it? If you have it, as we're lucky enough to do, to feed into another solution that says, okay, we prioritize them. What we'll do is automate the remediation of them. So actually, the ones that you're comfortable with will actually automate the remediation. We'll close those. The ones that you may want to make your own decision, we'll highlight it, say yes or no. So that's really why I'll say to HelpSystems, the amalgamation of solutions. So.
Yep, perfect. Awesome. Thanks for that. Okay. So we're going to come to the first poll now. So hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to answer that one. We'll open up the second poll very shortly. So with the first poll, we asked what common security risks or entry points are you most concerned about? It was multiple choice, and the audience has multiply chosen. And actually, there's two winners with the vast majority of the votes, about 40% each. We've got phishing, and the other one is I believe that's ransomware. So we've got phishing and ransomware as the two biggest concerns for the audience. And then actually lack of patching was the next most populous, but still a long way behind the other two. So quite definitive answers from the audience there. What do you make of that, Donnie? Are those the ones that when you speak to customers, when you see the marketplace, do you see those as the biggest issues?
Yeah, certainly phishing and ransomware are always the two that are most prevalent. They're also the ones that are most spoken about and most visible. And I actually have, I won't name as a company that I work with for, not where I actually use as I'm a customer of theirs. And about 6 weeks ago, I had a message through to say, look, we've been attacked. Basically, we've had a breach, and it's actually ransomware. They're still down. Now, wow. I'm going to say it's about 6 weeks, and I can't use them. I use them sporadically. It's something I might use for birthdays and anniversaries, should I say, but still down. And I just don't know how after 6 weeks, I think in terms of them recovering is just really difficult. You know, and I think that all goes back to you have to have a really good strategy in place, and you have to know how to talk about prevent. You need to be able to detect, you need to be able to respond as well. Something that I would fix, so phishing and ransomware, absolutely. Something that I see a lot, and this is across all different operating systems and all different vendors, is misconfiguration. And that might be bad configuration or not configured at all, in that applications or devices are installed with default passwords, with default access methods in, so it's very common. So I see misconfigurations. So typically it's not malicious. It's just, I think diligence hasn't been paid to it. So no, totally agree. So phishing and ransomware, absolutely the most common.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very concerning. A company that's been down for 6 weeks, I mean, that's a death knell.
Yeah.
You do sort of wonder if they're ever coming back from that. That's quite horrifying. Okay, so that's the first poll. We're going to open up the second poll now. Again, you've got about 10 minutes to answer this one. This time, we're asking, which proactive security assessment technology solutions does your organization currently utilize? Multiple choice, but you can select more than one, select all that apply. And hopefully this is coming up on your screens now. The options are vulnerability scanner, static and/or dynamic application security tools, penetration testing tools, or adversary simulation, red teaming tools. As I say, about 10 minutes to answer that one. Please do get answering. Okay, so hopefully we've convinced the audience as to the importance of a proactive cybersecurity strategy. And again, this is a question we touched on slightly earlier, but I think it's worth emphasising again, Donnie. What recommendations do you have for an organisation that's just starting out down this path? Perhaps they're starting to build a security program, or maybe even rebuild it. Where should they start?
Vulnerability scanner again, literally vulnerability scanner. I think what's happened, I think with so many people working from home or working remotely, I should say, I think the challenges have changed or been exacerbated. And I think that where some companies had a really good security strategy anyway, when lots of people started working remotely, I don't think some people took it serious. I don't think they realized they didn't have the blanket, they didn't have the hug of the corporate security around them when people started working from home. And again, nothing malicious, it's just there's children and animals and parcel people knocking at the doors, the other distractions that you wouldn't normally get in a work environment. So you sometimes don't feel that you're in a working environment. So start with the basics. Again, do something, start your vulnerability scanners. Once you've gone through and prioritized, as I mentioned before, just prioritize the vulnerabilities that are the highest priority, and you've done something about them, you've remediated them or done the best you can to remediate them, then we'd really recommend moving on to a pen test. And I almost see a pen test as a badge of honor, not just to do a pen test, but if you've got to the point that your company's ready for a pen test, then you're really on your way to having a really decent security strategy in place. I touched on it briefly before, but if you run a pen test at the very beginning, it's a bit pointless, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, because if you haven't gone through your vulnerabilities anyway, it's just too early. So I think get a good foundation in place, do your pen test, address, again, you don't have to address anything. This is all about your security strategy. It's all about addressing your highest priorities as best you can. It's where you put your time and effort and your money into it. Once you've done that, then you can take the results and I say prioritize them, and then that's when you can really define what the next level of maturity level is your security strategy looks like. And like I say, you still need to be reactive, but you still need the proactive where you're predicting what might happen next. And a lot of the companies we talk to that have got they're on level 3, they're on analysis and prioritization, risk focused, they have the data analytics and they're doing something with them. That's the important thing, like I said before. You're going to get so inundated with information that you really need a tool to sift through it and prioritize it for you. As some companies get stuck at level 3, and it's understandable, but again, whilst I'd love everybody to be at level 5, I totally understand why they can't. People still have a business to run. So you can protect yourself as best you can. That's absolutely great. The next level up, moving on from that, so is when you go to level 4, the attacks management. I say it's attacker and threat focused. And I wish I could credit this to the person that told me this. They asked the question, what's the difference between vulnerability and a threat? And they said the vulnerability, the reason I remember it goes back to houses. So the vulnerability is going on vacation and leaving your windows open. So you've left yourself vulnerable. A threat is when somebody's actually climbing in that window. And I thought it's a good way of doing it. And for me, from a security aspect, it really hit home. So I thought that was really good. The really important bit, level 4, attack management, the very first line on here, once at this level, vulnerability signal the framework of an entire ecosystem of management from discovery to exploitation to remediation to validation. And that's the whole point. Yes, you need to start somewhere. You address that, you get vulnerabilities, you address it, do your pen testing, address them. You're in a good place then to start looking at your entire ecosystem from end to end, from data coming into your company till it leaves your company, and also the journey it takes internally as well.
Yeah, perfect. Now, we talked a bit about regulations earlier, regulated industries as well. Are there certain types of industry or types of organizations that would benefit more from this sort of proactive approach than others?
I mean, the most obvious are going to be financial, healthcare, tech companies. But really, with regulation, it applies to anybody and any company of any size. And again, this comes down to prioritization. One of the something actually happened to me. I was at an event, an IT event, and I was actually talking about GDPR and regulatory compliance. And there was a person had taken photos of the event. And at the end, they came out and said, "Look, come just have talks." I said, "Yes." He said, "Literally, I'm a one-person company, and I take photos." That's brilliant. He said, "But I specialise in children's birthday parties." He said, "So what I do, I'm paid to go to these events, take photographs, and then share them out." He said, "Do I need to comply with any regulation?" So yes, he was in Europe anyway, and he pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop, and it was just a spreadsheet with the names of children's parties, who he was doing, who the attendees were, all their email addresses, the guardian's full address, and there's so much personal information on there, and photographs. And I'm like, yeah, you've got a real challenge here. You're going to have to comply with a number of regulations. It's like, I'm one person. Yeah, what do I do? And I think that was the whole point, is that it's not just a big corporation that need to comply. It's every company and really everything. And I think that the whole point that what I'd like to try and get across is people need to think of security not as something they have to do. It should be something that when I get up in the morning and go to work, I know that I need to put on clothes before I go to work. I don't think about it and think from a security aspect. People shouldn't have to think about it. It should be something they do. But for us to do that, we have to build that into our culture. We have to build it into our own responsibility. What I say to people is, look, I don't know anybody who hasn't had a text come through saying that they need to pay some, they click on the link to get a refund from the tax office, or they've got a parcel being delivered. And I say to people, you're very careful looking after your own personal bank accounts. Just put that into every aspect of your life. You lock your car when you go to the shop. Make sure that when you're at work, just treat it as is everything was your own, and it becomes the norm.
Yeah, so this sort of, I guess we're moving on to talk about employee awareness. So is that sort of employee awareness of the threats and the processes they have to follow, is that must be part of the proactive strategy as well then?
Definitely, and this is something I've seen change over the years. HelpSystems acquires a lot of companies, and we acquire a lot of companies, not just in security and automation as well. And when we acquire those companies, they're at different levels of maturity level of their security strategy maturity level. But what used to happen, what I used to see working in a relatively large company, we're in 18 different countries, is there would be when you joined, there'd be, you have to tick a box to say, yep, I've read your email security documentation and your web security documentation, and yeah, I'll make sure that everything I do is good. Now, that's moved on massively in that any new employees, I want to say employees, these will be external contractors as well. Anybody who may have access into anywhere within our network, or you should think of this in your network, has to go through training. And it's not a checkbox exercise. It's they have to go through training for them to realize why security is important, but also how to identify a potential breach. When I say breach, people sometimes think it's too big, but a phishing email is a potential breach. If somebody clicks on the link, it's a potential breach. And it's not only teaching them how to recognize it, it's teaching them what to do if they recognize it, how you can get in touch with somebody, what the next step is. And also the bit I think we're really good in HelpSystems that are doing it is, if anybody does click on it and think, oh, I really shouldn't have done that, it's known it's okay to go and tell the security team or whatever the process to say it's okay, we've done it. I'd much rather somebody came and said to me, you know what, I've actually clicked on this link, or I've accidentally sent an email out to somebody with a similar name. Can we do something about it? So I think it's creating an entire culture, which goes back to the we need buy-in from the exec team to create an entire culture that security is something we're responsible for. You're not going to get beaten up for it if you do something by mistake, but tell us so that we can minimize the impact. So I think the entire employee training is it's very, very important. Coincidentally, and I'm always very much aware not to talk about help system solutions because that's not what I'm here for. This is an educational. The last company we bought, which was very unusual for us, was a company that specialises in training employees to be security aware as opposed to a security solution. So a company bought, it's in 18 languages. That's another important thing. We want to make security easy. And it can do things like send out phishing exercises in your own company. So obviously if you click on it, it doesn't do anything apart from pops up and says, do you know what? This is really a phishing email. This is the training that you need to take. And again, we're not going to be in trouble for it. So I think phishing simulations, we talk about red team adversary simulations, you can make it much easier than that. You can actually do employee education in a neat way as well. So it's extremely important.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Now, we're going to come on to the results of our second poll very shortly. Just before we do, though, I mentioned the cybersecurity skills shortage back in my introduction. Still very current. It's been an ongoing story for a long time now, and it's certainly, if anything, worse now than ever. How can organizations overcome the challenge and still build a proactive strategy?
I think about this a lot, probably a bit too much. I always look at succession planning, and I think that any company has, where there's a lot of knowledge in a particular area, especially key areas like security, that knowledge could leave the company. Either if they're very lucky, they might get to end their working life and be able to afford to retire, or they may move on to pastures new. So we also think about succession planning. So there's a potential skills shortage. I think that leveraging tools to not just do your vulnerability scanning, but all the other areas as well. And again, this comes down to your proactive strategy. You pick and choose the highest risk areas that you can, using tools and taking security and automation together. Automation is the key. Now, if you have a security tool or security tools that can say, oh, this is open, this is exposed, having an automation tool to feed it to actually remediate for you means somebody else doesn't have to. Using automation and automated security, I think, is absolutely key, because you can use people's skills to teach the automation tools how a person would react or how a process should be. And what that does is, not just make it easier, more visible, it means that the people who are doing those processes now, let's say it saves 10% of their time, they can do something much more interesting, which might be working towards the rest of the security strategy in the company. The final bit I would say about is, I think, make security easier. I'm come from a background where I come from mid-range machines, mainframe machines, and at the time when I was a kid, it was quite a skill to be in. It was all like a closed club, and you felt quite special. Now, people should feel special, but don't keep it to yourself and don't make it difficult. One of the areas of security is that it's moved away from being, I shouldn't say this, but it's moved away from many years ago being perceived as quite boring, or something that people will try at it, we'll do a little bit. It's moved away to now become a full industry, and it's actually a really exciting industry for people to move into. So convince people at university to do cybersecurity specific courses, I think, would be good. Companies like HelpSystems and other cybersecurity companies, I think they should make their tools available free of charge to universities, so they can actually have classes that are actually real life tools that people would use. But kids, can make it easy. Don't use all the acronyms, and they change every day. There's new acronyms coming out every day, and I just think it puts people off. I just think if you're talking to people about security, people think might get into it, and you talk about something, I think, well, I don't know what that means, and they're thinking about what that 3-letter acronym or the 4-letter acronym means. I think stop using the acronyms. Just, if you want to say it's data leak prevention or data leak protection, say it. Don't use it. So that's one of my little bugbears. I think make it a bit easier. It is an exciting industry. Teach people younger, have given the opportunity to teach younger, and just make it easier for people to get into.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that applies across IT as well. I think we probably win the acronym bingo for the industry with the most number of acronyms in it, where there are so many, and there's new ones coming all the time. Now, we are almost out of time today, so let's dive back into our second poll and see what the audience has told us. So we asked, which proactive security assessment technology solutions does your organization currently utilize? It was multiple choice and the audience could select more than one. Now, the previous poll was very emphatic. There were two areas that were very much ahead of the others. This one's more equivocal. I can see that vulnerability scanning is actually the most popular security assessment technology solution, followed closely by pen testing tools. Behind that, we've got static and/or dynamic application security testing tools at about 21%, and then just under 10% saying adversary simulation or red teaming. So it's very much vulnerability scanning at the top, and not too far behind that with pen testing tools. Is that sort of the split you'd expect to see?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we refer back to the actual security levels, say level 0, level 1 vulnerability scanners, so most companies are at that level, or they have those solutions available. That's good. They're doing something, and something really worthwhile with the vulnerability scanner. When you get down to the other end, I think it was 10% you said for the red teaming tools. That's really when you're getting up to the level 5 and you have a full-blown security strategy, and your threats are managed proactively. And then you have red team to try and follow through the whole journey that an actual company or person would do as they break into your environment. So yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I'm really pleased to see that people have static and/or dynamic application security tools. I'd actually throw something else in there as well as source code. That's in there actually, but that's my whole point. SAST and DAST. Yep, spell them out. Dynamic application security tools. Source code. Application testing as well, absolutely, which is in there. I think, not just testing the applications to make sure that they're secure, take it back a level and actually test the source code to make the source code doesn't have any vulnerabilities before it becomes part of the application as well. So yeah, it's quite pleasing actually. It's like I say, I think these 5 levels, anybody who's on level 1 or 2, at least they know there's somewhere to go. So it's,
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thanks very much, Donnie. Well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank Donnie today for answering the many questions that I had during the course of the webinar. Also, thanks to you for watching. Thanks for taking part in the polls, and thanks for your questions that came in during the webinar. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time for more.